Let's begin by just learning to see things as they are. People don't usually see what's really there unless they learn to see. We've psychologically created a visual shorthand for everything in our heads. I imagine this was a useful skill in the hunter-gatherer times, but not so much when we're trying to represent something with our drawing tools. We need to learn to see the things we're drawing clearly. The best way to learn to see is to learn to use landmarks on objects. Let me show you what I mean. Here's an apple. As a student trying to learn to draw, I would look at a real apple, not a photograph. I'm personally looking at a photograph right now because the area where I have set up all these video cameras is really small. The reason you should not look at a photograph is because part of what we're trying to figure out right now is how to convert a three-dimensional object we see into a two-dimensional representation on paper. If we took a photograph, the camera would do part of the work for us. Don't get me wrong, there's a time to study photographs in the process of learning to draw, but this is not it. Okay, so we have our apple. When we draw objects, the best way to do it is to mentally convert them to basic shapes, and then sketch the basic shape. After we have our sketch of the basic shape, we gradually take away bits of the basic shape to form the shape of the object we see. The basic shapes are circle, square, and triangle. In three-dimensional forms, these are translated as sphere, prism, cylinder, cone, and pyramid. We really get into what it means to deal with those shapes in the next lesson. But okay, I've converted my apple to a circle in my head, and now I'm going to measure the circle with my pencil. A few different ways as I'm looking at the apple. Here, I divide the circle into half vertically, then I look at my apple. Is the stem actually in the center of the apple? Usually no. Usually it's on top just off center. Is the apple spherical so that the top and bottom of the apple are rounded? Usually no. The apple I'm looking at is kind of oblong compared to my circle. It's more rounded at the top than at the bottom. So I adjust my drawing to represent what I actually see. The bottom of the apple has these ridges, so I'm accounting for what I'm seeing there in my drawing. The top of the apple is concave where the stem protrudes. As someone with little drawing experience, I might not know how to deal with that, but I would try to represent it somehow. Okay, now my drawing is starting to look like an apple. Here's what I got to do next. I need to account for value in my drawing. Value is the lightness and darkness of the form. Many of you would call it shading, but that isn't what professional artists call it. The best way to see value in your object is to either look at it in natural light, under the sun, preferably between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., or to put one lamp near it and turn out the other lights in the room. We're going to really discuss value in a future lesson, but for now, I will give you 3 hints as to how to represent value. Number 1, don't get caught up in needing to represent the local color of the object through value. What I mean is this: my apple is red, my pencil doesn't do red. I'm not going to waste my time trying to make the viewer of the object see red by scribbling all over the apple in a vain effort to depict red. What I'm going to do instead is look for places I see the light reflecting off the apple. This is the brightest thing I see. This is the darkest thing I see. I think I can see a value that's almost as bright as the brightest thing I see here and here. I see something that is almost as dark as the darkest thing I see here and here, and the rest of the apple is sort of middle value between the brightest and darkest. So I've broken down the values into 5 distinct areas: the brightest, the darkest, and the middle, as well as the close to bright and dark values. These values have names, and we'll talk about them in a future lesson. Number 2, drawing details is all about mark making. In other words, there are many different ways artists represent these values on paper, but they all agree that the direction of mark making should follow the form. Number 3, an easy way to deal with this lightness and darkness as one who's just learning to draw is to use pencils of different value. So maybe use the white of the paper for the brightest parts of the drawing, use your H4 for the next to lightest, use your HB for the middle, use your B4 for the next to darkest, and then your B8 for the darkest parts. I will finish my drawing. You should finish your drawing. Here's what you need to ask yourself. once you've finished that drawing. Can you hold up your drawing to the apple you looked at and see approximately the details in the shape? The concavity of the top where the stem comes out, the ridges at the bottom of the apple, the weight at the top of the form. Did you see all 5 values we discussed clearly differentiated in your drawing? This part is dark, this part is bright, this part is a middle value, and these parts are almost light and dark. And do all of your marks flow with the form? Next, we'll discuss the 3 basic 2-dimensional shapes and the 5 basic 3-dimensional shapes in detail, so we can use them to draw more objects. Hint: everything you will ever draw is a modification of the 5 basic shapes or a combination and modification of the 5 basic shapes. Drawing everything works exactly like drawing this apple. We began by seeing the object as related to one of the 5 basic 3-dimensional shapes. Then we gradually modified the shape until we see the object we're drawing emerge from the sculpting the shape. The biggest mistake most young artists make is that they try to draw finished lines before they have done the work of the structural sketching.